We need some clarity on this. The bombs being lobbed from both corners of this particular boxing match. It's hard to understand which way is up, which information is true, which information is not true. And maybe you could start off by telling us whether it's Coca-Cola or Delta Airlines or Major League Baseball, what are they taking issue with exactly?
Well, first of all, everything that's being said in the criticism is completely wrong. In fact, I think this may end up getting labeled as the biggest lie of 2021. And in fact, it's so bad that even the Washington Post, which, as you know, is a very liberal newspaper and wholly and entirely supported Joe Biden in his presidential run, they actually gave Joe Biden 4 Pinocchios in their fact check for making claims like saying that they were cutting down on early voting days in Georgia, that they were cutting back on the amount of time polls are open. I mean, it was just one thing after another like that. Wasn't true. The biggest, look, it's a big bill, but the biggest thing that these companies have been concentrating on apparently has been Georgia's voter ID requirement. And what's so odd about that is that Georgia's had a voter ID requirement in place for more than a decade. Mm-hmm. Now, it only applied to in-person voting. And what this reform bill did is it extended it to absentee balloting. But there are a number of other states that do that, and the voter ID requirement that Georgia has, it's in line with that of numerous other states, including, by the way, Colorado, which is where Major League Baseball moved his All-Star game to.
Where they moved the game, right. And Hans, I've had conversations online and elsewhere about this with people who are supportive of Major League Baseball's decisions, and they claim, I've heard this argument many times, well, nobody is opposed to voter ID. That's not really the problem. The problem is there's a bunch of other stuff that they did that are going to disproportionately affect African-American communities in Georgia, and the real purpose of this is to suppress African-American turnout. What's your response? What are they referring to? Is there any merit to that argument at all?
No, there isn't. Apparently, there were these critics were going around saying, "Oh, they were going to cut back on the early voting period." That, in fact, is not true at all. In fact, the state added another day, so that there are 17 days of early voting. Compare that to the state of New York, which I think has about half that much, and yet New York is the corporate headquarters of Major League Baseball. So again, they simply cannot actually rationally point to a single provision in the bill that's somehow going to keep black residents of the state from voting. Look, what folks have to understand about this is that, look, these are the same kind of arguments that have been made for years by folks on the left about things like voter ID. The ACLU actually filed a lawsuit when Georgia first passed its voter ID law. They lost the lawsuit. They lost it because the judge in the case, who, by the way, was appointed by a Democratic president, pointed out that after 2 years of litigation, they were unable to produce a single witness who would be unable to vote because of the voter ID law. And we know it doesn't keep black residents of the state from voting because it's been in place for 10 years. We have 10 years worth of turnout data. And not only did the turnout of black voters in the state not go down, it increased dramatically. They've had record increases in voter registration and turnout in the state, including of black voters. So they're just making these complaints up out of thin air.